Eric here with a review of Dark Souls 3 for Xbox One. I should probably start by saying that I'm approaching Dark Souls 3 from a different perspective than many people. I actually really love Dark Souls 2, much more than Dark Souls 1, so I approached Dark Souls 3 not with hope that it returns to form now that Miyazaki and the FromSoft A-Team were back at the helm, but rather that it didn't stray too far from what I liked in Dark Souls 2. Luckily for fans on both sides of the fence, Dark Souls 3 is really a combination of everything From Software has learned from the Souls series as well as Bloodborne. This is both a good and a bad thing, however, because borrowing the best bits and pieces of previous games makes Dark Souls 3 occasionally feel more like a greatest hits compilation rather than something fresh and new. It slaps you in the face with areas either meant to resemble, or literally are, areas from previous games, or boss fights that play out exactly like fights in previous games, over and over again. It is all still good and fun and awesome, but nothing is really a surprise like every new encounter was in past games. Dark Souls 3 doesn't really have its own distinct identity like the other games do. Level designs are a combination of Dark Souls 1 and 2 ideas, but somehow more linear. Everyone loved how Dark Souls 1's levels were all connected with paths and shortcuts that made them feel like real places instead of just video game levels. And fans were disappointed by Dark Souls 2's more linear collection of hubs with branching paths. Well, Dark Souls 3 uses a different idea. This time around, the game world is shockingly linear, even more so than Dark Souls 2. But while the levels are mostly connected to each other by a single path, the levels themselves have multiple paths and shortcuts within them. It is an interesting compromise between the competing styles of the first two games, but not necessarily ones that will satisfy fans, especially if you're hoping for the spiderweb of crisscrossing paths like Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne had. While the level designs are only okay, the core gameplay is as solid as ever. Though I do have to admit it seems a little easier than past games. Dark Souls 1 was just sadistic with its level and encounter designs. It was basically designed to screw you over at every turn. Dark Souls 2 toned that down significantly. It was still difficult, but it was more fair. Dark Souls 3 takes that even a step further. Maybe it's just because I have a ton of experience with the series now compared to my first runs with previous games, but I really haven't had trouble with Dark Souls 3, much to my own surprise. Normally I'm not shy about summoning a player or an NPC for help if I need it. But since my review was done pre-release, the servers weren't turned on, so there wasn't actually anybody available to help. I had to just man up and plow through bosses, and after a try or two, even when the boss seemed impossibly unfair at first, I've managed to beat them. Am I just better at the game? Is Dark Souls 3 really easier? I don't know, but I'm leaning towards the latter, because of the fact that you get a ton of Estus shards, and a ton of bones to increase your Estus recovery, and there's a crazy overabundance of bonfires everywhere, sometimes like 100 feet from each other, that sure make it seem like FromSoft wanted to make the game easier. One thing Dark Souls 3 brings back from the original game that was missing in Dark Souls 2 is having powerful optional enemies scattered around levels. These are imposing monsters or strong knights, totally out of your league that you could choose to fight if you wanted to, but you could always just ignore them if you wanted. There are even optional mini-bosses in Dark Souls 3 that give you great rewards, like boss souls or crazy powerful weapons that you could have passed by and not even know they were there, and you didn't know they were bosses to begin with. That's really cool to just stumble upon powerful stuff like that. There are a couple of new ideas that are great additions too. Magic now has a separate meter you have to refill with a special second Estus flask. You can choose to allot Estus uses into either the HP or magic flasks, so that will be an interesting strategic choice for casters. I'm a sword and shield kind of guy, so I just put all my Estus into HP. I'm also a fan of how involved the NPCs are throughout the game now. You meet a ton of folks out in the world, and if you meet the right conditions, they go back to the hub at Firelink Shrine and will help you out. If you don't fulfill their requests, though, or you do something they don't like, they'll leave and you won't see them again, or maybe they'll come back as an enemy. Again, that's awesome. Ultimately, Dark Souls 3 is a mix of old ideas with some fresh takes that make for an overall very enjoyable Souls experience. It may not thrill you the same way that your first time with other Souls games did, since it does rehash a lot of the cool stuff you've already seen, almost to the point that I would call it fan service, but it's still a fantastic game. Some aspects are a step back, like the world layout and lack of new thrills, but it still does everything else as good or better than the rest of the series has ever done. From a pure mechanical gameplay perspective, it is easily the best playing game in the series. And you know what? I like the fact that the difficulty is toned down a little bit. I also really appreciate that it's a mix of the best ideas from the entire series, and not just an apology letter to die-hard fans of Demons or Dark Souls 1 about how bad they think Dark Souls 2 was, which it wasn't. Personally, I'd have to say overall I probably like Dark Souls 3 more than the first game, but less than the second game. Which, as I mentioned at the start, I'm one of those crazies who thinks Dark Souls 2 is the best. So I'm not exactly a typical Dark Souls fan. All in all, though, it's the greatest hits of the Dark Souls series' best features, which make it a fantastic game overall and a more than worthy entry that fans will love. Thanks a lot for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe because we've got lots of others and we're going to do a lot of cool stuff this year. Thanks!